Now, Gauteng MEC for Human Settlements and CoGTA, Lebogang Maile, is expected to visit Tembisa East of Johannesburg this morning following a violent service delivery protest that rocked the township this week. At least 4 people have died. A municipal building and several vehicles belonging to the City of Ekurhuleni have been torched. Protesters are reportedly unhappy about an increase in rates along with higher electricity prices. The deaths as a result of the protest have once again cast the spotlight on police reaction to such incidents in the country. And to help us unpack this issue, we are now joined by David Bruce, an independent researcher specialising in policing and consultant for the Institute for Security Studies. Great to have you. Thanks so much for joining us here on the programme, David.
Good morning. Yes, good to be here.
So, policing effectively versus violent protests. What are your views right now? I mean, it's a very, very difficult conversation, but where do we draw the line between police officials firing rubber bullets to disperse a crowd or defend themselves and protect others involved as well?
Well, I think in a way it's not that complicated. What we had here was, there's clear information showing that there were incidents of violence by some participants in this protest. There were buildings that were burnt, and there was property destroyed. There were cars that were set alight, and so on. And I think that what would widely be accepted is that police have what are known as less lethal weapons for trying to prevent attacks on property of this kind. And those weapons are potentially lethal weapons. As we know, rubber bullets can kill people, particularly if used at short range. So, those can also be used as weapons for self-defense. But if they are in serious danger, they are, if there's a danger to their lives or the lives of other people, they are also authorized to use their service pistols or other, live ammunition to defend themselves. So there's no real sense in which they aren't authorized, firstly, to protect themselves, but also, they are within the full authority of the law to use the less lethal means that they have at their disposal to try and prevent these kind of attacks on property.
So obviously, I understand what you're saying, and this is what the law stipulates. But of course, we've also had situations where police abuse those powers. We still have some of these matters actually in court. Might there be a trust issue as well between police, their work, and civilians?
Yes, well, the one issue that was highlighted by, for instance, in 2 weeks' time, we're going to be looking back at the Marikana episode. And of course, there was an extensive commission of inquiry that took place into the event at Marikana. And the one, thing that came out very strongly at Marikana was the kind of comprehensive dishonesty of the police. And, one of the issues that is raised by the report of the commission and was raised by several of the witnesses at the commission is the need to establish a culture within the police which is committed to, truth. And so, the one thing is that, for instance, now we have these accounts emerging about what happened in Tembisa. But, there's a serious question mark as to whether we can rely on the accounts that are being provided by the police, because the police do not have a reputation for providing, for accounting for these kinds of episodes in a truthful manner.
South Africa, obviously, as we know this, we can't afford to have trigger-happy police officials. However, the reality is that we live in an exceptionally violent society and have violence-ready civilians. So where to from here? You know, it's to find that balancing act where we're asking for tougher policing, but at the same time, with tougher policing, we don't want to be seeing very violent police officers that are killing civilians. I mean, so this is where we need to find that balance. I suppose it's very similar to the first question I asked you, but how do we find that? Where do we go in this country?
Well, you see, I mean, I think the one thing is that we should be much more comprehensively speaking out more generally against the problem of violence in South African society. We can't just try and address these issues in a one-sided type of way. So, I mean, for instance, I mean, I think, you know, we should be raising questions about it seems clear that, you know, people in Tembisa do have grievances. You know, it also seems clear that there were attempts made by members of the municipality, the Metropolitan Council, to engage with residents. But nevertheless, you've got people taking to the streets, and some of the people within the people associated with the protest, because I think it's a mistake to blame the violence on the protesters, on the people who were involved in the protest as a whole. But there were distinctively a group within the protesters who have then resorted to this kind of violence. And I think, I think it is valid to raise a question and to challenge that kind of behavior. I don't think we should just accept that that kind of behavior is taking place. There's, government buildings and so on that have been destroyed, and obviously that is not acceptable, I would say. And so I think we do need to keep the scrutiny on the police, but it shouldn't be done in a way where we don't challenge or question a lot of the violence that is used in these kinds of situations.
When we talk about rubber bullets, because in a lot of circumstances, rubber bullets are used to control crowds, but there are allegations as well that rubber bullets are not traceable, but they can kill. What is your comment on this as an expert? Perhaps you can advise us on it.
Well, you see, I mean, to me, the issue here is just that we need to start off with the simple fact that the police do not have clear standards which they provide to their members as to the use of rubber bullets. And as far as I'm concerned, this represents a serious negligence on the part of the police leadership and the government. This issue has now been raised for a sustained period of time, that the police leadership and government need to be providing clear standards to the police about, the framework for the use of rubber bullets. What is an acceptable range at which to use these weapons? Are there any circumstances where they can or should be used at short range? Any questions like that? And the standards that are provided are completely unsatisfactory, completely vague. And so, that's my point of entry into this question. You're correct in saying that, the ballistic tests can't link rubber bullets to a particular firearm or shooter and so on. And so, the traditional methods of accountability through kind of investigations and so on have limited value in trying to ensure that police who have misused rubber bullets are held accountable for that.
Yeah. I mean, why are we using untraceable rubber bullets? I suppose that should be one of the questions, and that are capable of killing. Surely this is a serious concern. And in some of your research, police in South Africa who misuse rubber bullets are hardly ever held accountable. I mean, cases are difficult to solve using investigation techniques, as the evidence can't always be conclusively linked to specific police members. So as a result, the Independent Police Investigative Director, that's IPID, struggled to resolve them. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about this, that, why continue to use rubber bullets if this is the case?
Well, you see, Rubber bullets are, as far as I understand, they're a necessary part of police equipment. If you look again back at Marikana, if rubber bullets had been deployed effectively in that situation, you would have been able to avoid the use of lethal force. And so, the reason, and it's motivated for in, United Nations standards, that countries should introduce these kind of less lethal types of weapons to try and minimize the need for police to use lethal force. And the thing about rubber bullets, though they are in some ways, they don't have a very high level of accuracy, but they can be targeted at specific people. So, for instance, in the violence in Tembisa, what would have been appropriate is if the police had fired rubber bullets at people who were involved in the destruction of property. And so, on the one hand, it seems that they are a necessary part of police equipment. What you're possibly raising is the possibility that the police could look into upgrading the type of rubber bullets that they use towards finding a type of rubber bullet which is where ballistic or forensic methods would be able to link specific rubber bullets that are used in a specific shooting to a specific firearm, and therefore potentially use that to hold a police officer who has misused rubber bullet directly accountable.
David, as I let you go, David, we are in news, so very quickly, I mean, there's been so many conversations of late about police officers and the fact that, it just does not feel that the police have a grip on the situation in South Africa. I mean, whether we talk about the violence against women and children, we talk about protests that get completely out of control, like we saw happening in Tembisa, and many, many other stories. We know this on a daily basis. We do see this. People saying that the lack of respect for the police, perhaps the police are under-resourced, perhaps the police are not trained well enough, perhaps we don't have enough police officers, perhaps the corruption in the police force. There are so many reasons given. What do you think the problem is? Where does the problem with policing come in South Africa? Well,
again, that's quite a big question to ask, but I would say that, in some ways, that perhaps there are assumptions that we've made about the type of policing system that we are capable of creating. But, what it comes down to in the end is, I think we haven't had proper leadership around what I would call policy leadership, shaping the direction of our policing policy in a purposeful way, growing our policing system, addressing the challenges facing our policing system in a purposeful way. I don't think we have had that for a long time in South Africa, and I think we yet to put that in place.
All right, David Bruce, thanks so much for talking to us. We'll definitely invite you back for an even more in-depth discussion on police and issues that face us. Independent researcher specialising in policing and a consultant for the Institute for Security Studies.